I'm Stephen Foskett, the organizer of Tech Field Day, and we're here in Austin, Texas with StorMagic. Around the table are a group of invited writers and speakers from around the world to ask questions and learn about the products. If you'd like to learn more about our event, just go to techfieldday.com, and you can find many more videos like this at youtube.com/techfieldday.
So if we think of a customer with a number of sites, they're not going to want to configure individual servers, setting up the underlying storage, installing the operating system. We need to make this automated, right? Because we don't want to do it, say, 1,000 times. It's going to take a long time. So Jason obviously just going through the automation of actually provisioning the underlying storage. So in our concept, the actual RAID groups underneath using automated scripting. Then the NISCU, once the server's been configured with its BIOS settings and the storage, deploying the operating system, VMware, Hyper-V, and pushing out the configuration out there. So through that automation piece, we've actually provisioned the physical hardware, we've deployed the hypervisor operating system of our choice, but now obviously we want to get to the point and we want to be able to deploy StorMagic. Remember here, the focus is on deploying to lots of number of sites, making it very much easier for the admin and being able to roll out these deployments. One of our customers, a few years ago when they did the deployment to over 2,000 locations, were provisioning up to 40 to 50 locations for automation. Whereas previously they were doing a very small subset of that number. Okay, so that was very impressive. So what I have here is an automated demo. Again, I've recorded it, and we're going to walk through. So excuse me while I kind of walk back and to and from the screen when I'll be pausing. This was playing here. So what we have here is I have a vSphere web client, and we have our StorMagic integrated dashboard into there. So to get to this point, if you're running a Windows vCenter, you just run a setup exe, and we integrate directly into it. If it's the VCSA, you just run a shell script, we integrate, you get this plugin automatically. Okay, so this is then exposed to any admin. From here, basically, on the left-hand side, it's not completely clear. We have a data center, and under there we have a cluster, and we've got our 2 servers, okay? So think of this as a remote location. We've got our 2-server pair there set up in that location. Now, what we're going to do, when I figure out where the mouse is we'll deploy appliances out to this location. But first, just to show you the makeup of the server, these are actually Cisco C240 servers. They've got a number of disks underneath, configured in a RAID group. The networking, much like my diagrams before, what we have is, there's that mouse, 3 vSwitches. So vSwitch 0 here. I've got 2 redundant NICs to meet with VMware's best practices. And these are hooked up to a physical switch for our location. Following on from that, the other 2 switches there, individual NICs, and these are the ones with the crossover, the patch cable between the hosts, yeah, to isolate our mirror and iSCSI traffic. From a storage point of view, we have a RAID controller in there, and it's presenting up some storage for our VSAs to use. We've actually got an SSD drive there, should we want to use it, as well for caching. But essentially, there's a LUN there that we're going to handle up to the storage. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to go through a deployment wizard. So imagine that this customer has 1,000 sites to deploy, but they want to automate it. So what we're actually going to do here is use the deployment wizard to create a vanilla install. And at the end of this deployment wizard, through the configuration, what we've done there, we're going to export that as a Powershell script that can be reused a number of times. So essentially, in this respect, the admin doesn't need great experience with PowerShell, and the script itself will allow us to basically manipulate it and use it again and again. So here, what we've done is we've selected the host we want to deploy to, the 2 hosts in the cluster. Let me just back up here. It's going a little bit quicker than I would like. I do apologize. So here we're actually setting the VSA naming. So we can see our 2 hosts in the cluster. They're having a naming convention. We've just called it VSA. And then we have an incremental option here for numbering. So that number is basically saying we'll start from this number, and each VSA, the number's going to increment by 1. So we don't have to specify out each VSA name. This is the allocation of storage. So here what we're doing is we have the option to allocate storage from underlying storage device. So underneath, we have our RAID group. The storage is configured as a LUN and presented to ESX, but there's nothing on it. Our wizard has picked that up, and it basically says, OK, I actually see that there's this spare LUN here. Do you want me to use it as storage for the VSA? So when the VSA is deployed, these LUNs are assigned on the fly, just so the VSAs can use it once deployed. Here, we're configuring SSD caching and memory caching. So I'm going to go into our SSD and memory caching a little bit more after this demo. But from this point of view, you don't have to use caching with our product, but you can. So you can use just disks. You could use SSD caching in front of disks for read and write. You could use just memory for read only, or you can use a whole tier. So you could have memory, SSD, and your underlying disks. But I'll talk to that a little bit more. Essentially, though, on this slide, what we're doing is we're assigning an SSD volume to our VSAs, and we're assigning 2 gig of memory for memory caching. Now, on this page, what we're doing is we're configuring our networking. So remember, I was talking that we have our 3 virtual switches. We've got our management, if you will, where our production virtual machines will sit, and we've got those 2 back-end connections. So each interface for the VSA, so we're going to deploy the VSA out, and just a virtual NIC is going to reside on each of these V-switches. The one on the management interface is solely going to be used for management traffic. So this means admins can connect to the appliance, perform admin tasks, make changes. This will actually be where, as a primary connection to our witness device for that traffic, okay? Although it can fail over to the others. And then on the other 2 networks, we're going to isolate these for our mirroring traffic, so the VSAs can stay in sync, as well as our iSCSI traffic, so obviously the host can read and write to their storage. Let's tick through these. So on the back-end connections, I have an isolated network, so I need to set a static IP. So I just select a 192 range that doesn't broad across and conflict with anything else. Okay. So obviously, we need licensing, so we can just add licenses in there for the VSAs once deployed. Apply a password for the VSA, but here, what I'm actually doing, I selected the option to save as a PowerShell script. So we've got our summary here, just for clarity. What we've built up through that configuration wizard, so the settings, the network IPs, the storage allocation, all of that good stuff. All nice through an interface. We didn't need any PowerShell scripting skills to actually achieve this. But now we've got to the end, what we have is we have 2 tick boxes. We've got download a PowerShell script. So basically what it's going to do is can take all of that work we just did in that wizard in about a 2-minute time period and save it into a PowerShell script. So the beauty of actually doing that is now the customer has got this vanilla site install for one of the locations. So generally our customers, when they have a large number of sites, you know, each site 1, site 2, but they're all exactly the same in configuration. So now we actually have this PowerShell script, which built up our config, and there's very specific variable points. So a customer will want to go in, they'll want to amend perhaps the site name and the IP addresses at a minimum. And that means now what we can do is we could set a loop up on this script and then use it to deploy 10 sites, 20 sites, 100, 1,000, you know, and go. So what it has basically achieved is taken the pain out of an administrator sitting down, you know, for a day, typing out a PowerShell script, learning perhaps some new commands from our toolkit, and enabled them to create it in a minute, in a couple of minutes. It also, you know, they don't have to test for bugs or anything throughout this because it's been structured correctly, because obviously we've created it off the back end of the wizard. So now what we've done is we've basically initiated that script and it started the deployment of our appliances out to host. So what's actually happening here are tools that are installed onto the vCenter server. There's a small OVF template of our VSA. When you trigger a deployment, that OVF template gets pushed out to one of the hosts, and that configuration that was built up through the wizard, which is now in that PowerShell script, basically gets injected into that VSA. Once that actual deployment completes, those VSAs will automatically boot up, come up on online, and you have your virtual SAN across that cluster. So you can imagine how powerful this is to achieve a multi-site rollout, starting with Cisco's management into the fact of actually provisioning the underlying storage, the hardware from a BIOS 1, then actually doing the OS deployment using the tools from Cisco again, and then finally actually generating the scripts. So from the scripts that we've actually created across those 3 points, we can have a single script that will actually provision end-to-end. And this should be very relatively and very easy for administrators to actually achieve this.
Is it possible to use these templates to rebuild a cluster where I have lost a node?
Yeah, you can certainly do that, yeah. So if you'd lost a node, you'd have the scripts within Cisco, you'd be able to deploy the OS. From the point of view here, you would just step through a wizard rather than deploying 2 VSAs like I did there, select one, or you could amend the deployment wizard that is already there. Sorry, the deployment script that you wrote.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions on that?
There was a question that came in earlier about when you're growing this. Is it better to grow it in pairs, or can you just add individual nodes?
So you do have to take consideration when you're growing. So it's very easy to grow in pairs, yeah, because you can slot them in. If you plan to scale out to, say, 3 servers, an odd number, what you would do is on your first deployment, that underlying storage, you'd make sure it's in 2. So if you say you got 2 terabytes, you'd have 2 1 terabyte LUNs from the RAID group, because this means then when we actually create those storage mirrors, you can amalgamate them together, but it allows us to actually migrate them automatically. So we have automatic migration tools. So if you add another host to a cluster, you can go to our wizard and do a scale out essentially. Now, because the storage is divided, and please ask for clarity on any of these points, we can easily migrate those volumes up and around the hosts. If they were one large single pool, you would have to have the available capacity to be able to load balancing it. So that's just a consideration. If that isn't a possibility, there are steps that you can walk through to get there. But from an automation standpoint, that would be the ideal.
So would it be better to then have multiple 2-node clusters versus a one large, like 4 or 6-node cluster?
Yeah, it's generally what our customers will do.
Okay.
And bearing in mind that we're iSCSI, so it can be shared out to other hosts. Rather than taking a standard approach and basically saying, okay, add a new node. When you add a new node, what you're doing is you're adding CPU, you're adding memory, you're adding disk. But what if you don't have the requirements for all 3 of those? You may just want CPU and memory. So why put an extra host in with another X number of terabytes and have that expense? So by adding that host with just CPU and memory, you can connect to iSCSI volumes that are already on the original pair. So you can scale your environment in different ways depending as a requirement rather than a strict add a node, add a node, add a node.
It can be used for tolerance technology for your appliance.
I'm sorry?
For tolerance technology for your appliance, it's possible to use?
I'm sorry.
VMware FT, fault tolerance.
Fault tolerance. Yes, you can use fault tolerance.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
okay.
We have several customers using fault tolerance.
But fault tolerance for the VMs, not for the VSA, was that?
Yeah, for VM. Yeah, for VM.
Yeah, for the virtual machines on top. Because we're providing, fault tolerance, VMware HA, you need shared storage. We're ensuring that you have that shared storage, which is always available through a failure in the cluster.
I thought FT doesn't need shared storage anymore.
I can't challenge you on that because I'm not quite sure. I went through a wizard the other day. The tiebreaker files, I believe, need to be on shared storage, but VMDKs can actually be on local. So you have the standard tiebreaker file, which is locked between the VMs. That needs to be on a shareable volume between the hosts because they both need to be able to access that file. So, okay. But you're quite right in the fact that virtual disks can be offset onto local. Okay.
What's the net effect if the VSA is unavailable for a period of time?
So if you have a VSA down, you're going to use the storage presented from the other. Okay. So you actually raise a good point here. So if we were to shut down one of the VSAs, all it's going to do is that host where that VSA is hosted is just switch its iSCSI path. So because we're presenting redundant paths, it will just start reading and writing from the other side. So this raises an excellent point on how our customers actually go through patching. So if they need to patch the VSAs, they could actually patch them in the middle of the day if they wanted. So patching a VSA would require pushing a new firmware images and rebooting. So because you can reboot and run off the other side, you never impact your environment. It also helps with patching of any other hardware or software patching that you have in that environment.
Thank you.
Okay.